Hello, everyone. I'm David Frangioni, and we're here backstage at Hard Rock for another edition of the Modern Drummer Podcast. And I'm so excited to join our guest, Cindy Blackman Santana. Cindy, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here today. This is great. I followed your career from Lenny Kravitz to playing with Santana, of course. I've had the pleasure of seeing you perform many times. And I love your playing, and I love the energy of it. And so I'm asking questions today as much as a fan of your playing as on behalf of Modern Drummer. And so there's some questions that I've been, always wanting to ask you and just kind of understand on your journey. Like, for instance, let's start, you went to Berkeley. That was, from what I understand, that was a pivotal moment in your career. Of finding, more about the instrument and playing with other musicians, and just what did it do for you? What was that moment like, and how did that create a pivot as you started your drumming career?
It was very pivotal for me going to Berkeley because initially, when I was playing at home, I was playing with some musicians who were kind of in one vein. And I wanted to explore and expand on the things that I was playing, the type of music that I was playing, the type of rhythms that I was approaching. And, when I got to Berkeley, there was a whole school of people that wanted to do that as well. So for me, that was the best thing about Berkeley, was the expansiveness of the student load there, because, there were students from all over the place and you could play all kinds of music. So I might be in a session playing with a rock band or a funk band or a jazz rock band or a straight ahead band or an, like an odd meter fusion band or, any different number of bands that you could play with. And I was able to do that there, so that was really great. That was probably my favorite thing about Berkeley, but it also really had great ear training courses and harmony and theory courses.
Beyond the drums now, of course,
but
right?
also to go with the drums because, I believe that drummers need to at least be able to hear harmonic progression. So if you don't play a melodic instrument, that's okay, but you have to be able to understand the progression of the harmonies that are happening in the songs, so you know when to play and when not to.
Right.
And to understand melody is also a beautiful thing, and I love melody and harmony. So that, together with the rhythmic stuff that I already naturally gravitate to and love, is really giving the full spectrum and picture, of what the music is about. And it helps you expand on what you're doing when you have those awarenesses. So that was great for me, finding that at Berkeley. And then I had, some great private instruction too, so that was awesome.
You didn't study with Alan Dawson, right?
I studied with Lenny Nelson at Berkeley, but I was able to study with Alan Dawson after Berkeley.
In Lexington, at his house?
At his house, because when I got to Berkeley, Alan had already retired.
Oh, I see.
And I was like, well, where is this teacher? Where is he? And so then I was able to take some lessons afterwards, and that was really amazing. That put me over the top because Alan was such an incredible teacher, and such an example of a great human being. It was really, really great to be with him. Amazing.
And I want to get back to this in a second because he obviously taught Tony. I took lessons with Alan. I studied with him on and off for a couple of years, and I was so inspired by his approach, as you just said, and him as a person, and I also was inspired by who he had taught, because I came as a student of his after you, and after Tony, and after Kenwood Denard, and all these great drummers, and I was very inspired. Like, well, what's the secret sauce here that he is bringing? And I learned from him that as much as it was his approach, and it was very methodical, and it took you through, very specific steps to grow and to learn, and how he used head reed syncopation. But the biggest thing I learned was he would always say, "You got to figure out who you are." That was what he really taught me, was like, I know you love all these other drummers and you want to play this and that, but at the end of all of this, it's about your playing and how you uniquely are going to play this instrument. Did you do you remember that part of it, and do you how did that impact you?
You know, I was only able to take 2 lessons from Arland.
Okay.
But the amazing thing about him as a teacher is that those 2 lessons gave me so much information that I still use that stuff today.
Wow.
And when I went to him, he says, well, you're already professional, you're already playing, you're already doing this and you're already doing that. What do you want to know? So I told him what I wanted to learn. I said, I want better independence and better technique. And he said, okay. So we hit the books, and, when I made a first mistake in the exercises that he was teaching me, he says, okay, we're going to start there. And we started there. It was great, and then he gave me.
Thank you for watching and supporting everything Modern Drummer is up to. Hit the subscribe button down below. It means so much to us because we can keep bringing you the best drummers and content all the time. And please check out our shop. We've got Legends books. We've got back issues. We've got swag. Everything the drumming community could want. And it's so exciting to have you guys be the best part of it. Once again, thank you, and enjoy the rest of the video.
And then he gave me his ritual.
The
to learn.
rudimental ritual.
Yes,
Oh,
and
awesome.
I worked on that thing day and night.
It never stops.
I worked on that thing, and I memorized it. And by the time I came back to the next lesson, I had it down. I had to read it, but I had it. And he was like, "Whoa, okay, you worked on that, didn't you?" I said, "Yes, I did. Yes, sir, I did." And what another thing that I learned from him was the compassion of being an incredible person, because I was living, I had already stopped going to Berkeley by the time I was studying with him, and I was commuting from Hartford. I was living with my mother in Hartford, Connecticut.
Wow, okay, that's a commute.
And so when I got to his house, he says, okay, before we play a note, I want you to just sit down and relax. And then he went upstairs, and he brought me a sandwich and some juice. And he says, have some lunch. Just relax. I was like, wow, that's very sweet. He floored me. He was so kind. His wife was so kind. It was just so sweet being there in his presence. It really blew me away,
That makes as much of an impact as the drum lesson. When you meet somebody who doesn't have to be that kind and compassionate and is.
Yeah, exactly.
It's awesome.
Exactly.
Totally awesome. So now in the Berkeley time, you're now discovering all of these different styles of music and a lot of other musicians, and it's another world. And you expressed how the importance of harmony, melody, etc., that the non-rhythmic drum part of it, the traditional music part of it, right?
Yes.
Were you already interested in that and exploring that back at home besides drumming then, or was that something that you started to get more into when you got to Berkeley?
I was interested in it because I was interested in what I was hearing, but I had no idea of what I was really doing.
So musically, you were into it, but you hadn't had any training yet.
Exactly.
And now
I did have some training, because it's not that I didn't have training. I just didn't know how to get to what I wanted to get to in terms of the harmonies that I wanted to play, because I had gone to Hart College of Music with some preparatory college level classes.
Okay.
So I did traditional harmony and theory there. So I did have harmony and theory.
Okay.
But I wanted to know how to get to what I love the most, which is those complex harmonies, because I love Herbie. Herbie Hancock's my absolute favorite piano player on the planet, and my favorite harmonic genius. Between him and Wayne Shorter and Miles Davis, I mean, goodness.
So that was the inspiration.
That was
let
my
me
inspiration.
Search for how do I
get to
that
sounding
I hear?
close to that? I mean, not that I can do that, but how do I present that in the music that I want to play? So Berkeley helped me in terms of other harmonies, and it helped me in terms of ear training, to hearing intervals and being able to hear chords and stuff. It helped a lot with that too.
I mean, for drummers, that is something that's not the typical, it's not typically in the plan, right? But as we've grown over the years in drumming as musicians and with everything that's occurred in the world, like, you never, 10 years ago, a drummer wouldn't know all about how to video and do all these other things because it wasn't part of their daily life, right? It was just drums and recording if that's, what they were doing. But nowadays, like, that's a norm. Like, okay, you do video. Well, I think
Yeah.
from a music lane, parallel to that, I think it's becoming more norm for drummers to be more versatile and to be thinking beyond drums, thinking about the musicality of the song and whatever it is they're playing, from not just the drumming standpoint, but understanding AABA and, just all of these, arrangements, melodies, harmonies. And you said very profoundly, when we were talking about this a minute ago, that's how you would know how to contribute to the song, is that you'd know enough about the song from what was happening in the changes and what was building up and these other things that was more informed than if you were just listening from a rhythmic perspective and maybe you knew the song and you could follow it. But when you're actually understanding what's being played, it's such a different level of being able to speak to it musically.
It is, but the greatest drummers had that. Going back to Chick Webb and guys like that, Denzel Best, and fast forwarding a little bit to like Art Blakey and Max. They had that. Philly Joe Jones played great piano. I went to this Radio City Radio City Hall concert in New York, and it was for Miles Davis, tribute to Miles Davis, and he was receiving a doctorate. And so there were a couple of different bands playing, and one was like his 60s band, so it was, ended up being, I think, just trio. I think it was just Ron, Tony, and Herbie. But there was another band that played, and Philly Joe played in that band. And that was kind of like the cool school band, or and Philly didn't make it to the rehearsal that the band had. And so backstage, before they played, they were doing a little rundown of the music. And Philly had a snare drum and brushes. And he swung that band so hard, I was like, wow, he's just doing that with a snare drum and brushes. That's it? He just got his brush. I mean, it was incredible. And Walter Bishop Jr. was playing piano. And at one point, Philly got up away from the snare drum, put the brushes down, and he went over to the piano and he kind of scooted Walter Bishop off, and he started playing. I never saw him play piano before. And it was incredible. He blew my mind. So the greatest drummers, they already had that. Tony had great harmonic knowledge. These cats could hear, and even for the ones that didn't write, they could hear. But that's something that goes along with the territory that sometimes, as a young cat, you have to learn. But the greatest guys, they had that. Wow. So it's not new.
It's not new, but doing the work to get there it's amazing, because it's inspired and it's in the legacy of all the drummers that you just referred to, the icons. But I speak to a lot of drummers, and it's not as in the conversation as you would think or hope, maybe. So I think that it's for anyone that it is new to, because if you're not playing jazz or you're not playing music that is as complex harmonically or melodically, and you're playing rock or other styles, you might think, oh, that's not necessarily something I have to put a lot of time into shedding or understanding. But the fact is that the more you do, the wider the palette you're going to have on your instrument in any music.
Exactly.
And that's what's so awesome about it,
Yeah.
And so when did you first hear Tony Williams, and how did that make the impact that it had on your playing, that he was just somebody that you really were drawn to musically? He was an inspiration.
I first heard Tony from a friend of my older sister. She had a guitar player friend. She's a really great singer. She didn't continue professionally, but she had a beautiful voice. And she had a friend who was a guitar player, Greg Chappelle, in Connecticut, where we were living at the time. And he said, if you want to be a drummer, you have to listen to the greatest drummer ever. And I said, okay. And so he took me over to his house, and he put me in his basement, and he put on a record. He went upstairs, and he was, I don't know, eating dinner with his family or something. I don't know what they were doing up there. But he put on this record, and I'm listening, and I'm getting blown away by hearing this music. And he came back downstairs after the record finished, and he says, "What did you think?" And I said, "That was incredible. Who's that guy, on drums?" And he said, that was Tony Williams. And he put on Miles Davis live in Europe. And it just blew me away. And the other thing that blew me away was that he said, "This guy's 17." I was like, 17? Are you kidding me? And then he put on 4 and More. And then that further just took me out. And I was like, okay. And I was talking about Tony and finding every Tony record I could find, and I already was, I had heard a little bit of Tony, but not a lot, and anyway, this just really took me over the top. And so I kept talking about Tony, and another musician friend of mine, a couple weeks later, he said, "You know that drummer that you keep talking about, Tony Williams?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "He's going to be doing a clinic at Creative Music." That was Bob Gadsden's store.
Yeah,
yeah.
Of course.
And so he said, "You should go. It's next Sunday." And so I begged my mom. I said, "Mom."
How old were you at this point?
I was, I think I was 14.
Okay.
Something like
All
that,
right.
14 or 15.
Okay.
I was pretty young.
Yeah, soaking it all in.
And I said, "Mom, I have to go see this drummer. I have to go." And, we didn't have a lot of money or anything, but she got me there. She got me a ticket, and I went, and she waited outside for me. My mom is so sweet.
Oh, that's beautiful.
She got me there, and I was floored. When Tony started playing, my jaw just dropped. It was just him and a bass player, and his sound was so incredible, from the tuning to the bigness of the sound, to the richness, to his incredible technique and the ideas that he was playing. I was like, okay, I have to be chasing that for the rest of my life, or else I'm not doing anything. If I'm not going after that, then I might as well just stay home. That just changed my whole focus. It changed my whole thought about playing drums. It got me in a much more serious space, obviously, because you can't try to attempt that if you're not serious about the drums.
And committed. That's right.
And committed, for sure. And so that was my first time actually seeing him live. And, he's been my hero ever since.
And then that would have been, this is Miles' time? So he's playing a 4-piece with some K's? Or this is the yellow Gretsch?
This is his big yellow Gretsch kit.
Oh, okay.
This is in the 70s.
Okay. This is 70s. So he's electric at that point.
Yeah, this is his big yellow Gretsch kit. He was playing, I think the bass player was Bunny Brunel.
Okay.
He was like in the midst of one of his Lifetime band tours.
Okay.
And that was just an aside that they did on the tour, so he just did this drum clinic, and I'm telling you, it was mind-blowing.
I mean, I got to see Tony play, thank God, a few times, but not in clinic. Mm-hmm. So, and I saw him in very small clubs in Boston where I could be this close to the kit almost. So it was like, it was amazing to hear the power of what was happening. It was all, at that point, when I saw him, it was in the 80s, and he was playing back to, quartet and whatnot, jazz. It wasn't the electric time that I listened to on records, Believe It, and those albums.
Okay.
This was a little later than that. But the power and authority and seeing and hearing him in person and not believing, like, it looked, even though he was sweating and he was working really hard, what he was playing looked 5 times harder than what it sounded, than how he looked playing it. Like, it was just a touch and a power that was, even though he had incredible dynamics, obviously, but when he laid into it, I had never, all the great drummers I had the privilege of hearing, I'd never experienced anything like that. It was as much a sound as it was just incredible drumming. Like, I knew it was his playing within like one measure.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, very definitive. I mean, that sound and that level of clarity, his level of technique, and then when you hear all of that within his concept in the music, then it's just, I mean, there's nothing like that. I mean, he just really opened up the world of music, not only drumming, but he just opened up the whole world of music to so many other levels and dimensions that everybody who loves music needs to be thanking him, not just drummers.
Right, right.
Everybody needs to thank him.
No, you're right. And what's amazing is he did it in two related but yet completely different genres, because he redefined in so many ways fusion drumming when he went electric with Alan Pasqua.
He didn't redefine it. He started it. He didn't redefine. No. He invented.
Because this is pre-Billy. This is pre-Matt Vishnu. This is
come
pre
on,
all of that.
Let's not even talk about that. Tony invented, and that's one thing that bothers me, that people don't give him the credit. Tony invented what they call fusion, but he didn't call it fusion. Fusion to me is a watered-down version of what he did. Tony called it jazz rock, because that's what he did. He was mixing the elements of jazz and rock, also like Brazilian and Latin rhythms and African rhythms. He mixed all that together. But Tony didn't redefine that. He invented that.
So Believe It and these records are the first.
No, the first was Emergency.
Right, Emergency.
With the trio.
Okay.
with John McLaughlin and Larry Young and Tony Williams. And then on the next record, Turn It Over, they added Jack Bruce. So then you had Jack Bruce, you had a quartet.
Right.
And then after that is when he did Believe It in the other records, and the other Lifetime versions. And those were incredible. But that's what was the start of it. And you listen to that, and you can really hear like what he was doing with every band that he played with ever. And I'm talking, from the avant-garde to Miles to Stan Getz to what he developed, what he created. So Tony is the inventor of that. And that needs to be stated many times so people get that.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah, you're right. And that's something that is, it's when you innovate and you create it, that's the most amazing thing. That's the legacy that all of us as musicians want to try to contribute at that higher level.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that's incredible. So you saw him in clinic, and that was your first time seeing him in live.
Yes.
And so now, as your career continues to build post that clinic and being inspired and going to Berkeley, the first, I guess, largest stage that you landed on was Lenny Kravitz, right?
Absolutely.
And it's as rock as it gets.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And so how
sure.
did that, what did that, how did that play out? Because you play, I loved your playing with Lenny. I mean, I love your playing with all of these artists, but with Lenny, it didn't sound like a jazz drummer playing rock or a Tony-inspired drummer playing rock necessarily. It sounded like a great rock drummer playing rock, but that's a whole different, that's a twist of like where you were coming from and what was heavily influenced to what the gig is. How did that play out, and how did you like playing with Lenny, and how did you approach it?
Well, that was an incredible experience. Lenny's so great at what he does. Like, he's the best in that lane that there is. There's just nobody like him. He's very confident. He knows what he wants. He has a sound in mind. He loves great quality sounding instruments. So the whole thing was really right up my alley.
Because he's a musician's musician.
Yeah, he has an ear, for quality sound and for quality music, So that's all amazing, and I loved all of that. That was one thing that drew me to him. I had in my household, we had lots of music because my mom, when she was younger, played classical violin. So we had classical music. She used to take me to classical concerts all the time, my sister and I, and we had that in the house. We had my other sister had like a 200 LP collection of everything from Miles to Coltrane to Hendrix to the Beatles to Shaka Khan and Rufus to Santana. She had everything. She had everything in her collection. 200 records of all of that. So I heard and grew up with all kinds of styles. The Jackson 5 were popular when I was young. So I heard all of the pop stuff that of my day. I heard what my older brother liked. So there was a whole thing. My dad liked jazz, so he had his own collection. So we had Ahmad Jamal in the house. We had, of course, tons of Miles in the house. We had everything. We had Coltrane in the house. We had Bird in the house. We had so many things in the house to draw from, but we also had a lot of rock and roll in the house. We had a lot of James Brown in the house. We had everything. And we're from Ohio, so we grew up with Bootsy. So we had that. Yeah. We had P-Funk. We had everything.
And you're listening to all of these
I'm
records,
listening to all of
it's
it,
just
and I loved it all. So
okay.
People didn't understand, even though, yes, I am a jazz drummer, that is my favorite music. To me, that's the most incredible music, and it's the music that I most desire. But I love also other music. And so people were like, well, how come she's playing rock? Well, because I grew up with that too. Yeah. So that wasn't a stretch for me in my mind.
Right. And were you playing those styles as you were as you were taking all of them in from the record collections and your family's influence of music? Would you also go to the kit and like play a Beatles tune one day, play jazz another?
Absolutely.
All right, so it went beyond just listening. You actually were playing it too.
And I played in a couple bands that were like that too.
Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so I had a little bit of experience in that, and I liked it. So it was not a stretch for me. When I was fortunate enough to get that gig with Lenny, it was just a matter of presenting the music the way that he heard it, So I just checked out his style. I figured out his style and became, familiar with that and just did my best to give it everything that he wanted the music to have, plus some Cindy, in there.
Right.
And he's a drummer too,
right.
So it was actually very easy to communicate because he would say, okay, we're going to do this new song, and it goes like this. And he'd sit down and play it, and I'd say, okay. And then I'd sit down and play it. It was very easy to communicate with him in that way.
Right.
So that was a really amazing experience. And it was definitely, as you mentioned, my first foray into playing with large audiences. I mean, that was really kind of trippy. The very first concert that we did that had like 70,000 people in it, it was really kind of crazy because this was at a festival called Pink Pop. I remember that in the Netherlands, and it was in the summertime, and so most of the guys, probably almost all the guys, had their shirts off, and they were all doing the wave, so you just
70,000 people.
70,000 people doing the wave, and you just saw skin and you saw wave, and I was getting dizzy. I was like, whoa, and my equilibrium was kind of getting messed with, so I had to stop looking at the audience, and I couldn't look at them. I just had to play. That was my first foray into that, and it was really incredible because you're getting all this amazing energy feedback from so many people, 70,000, 100,000 people, it's just all of that. It's like a roar of just this kind of endorphin thing that just clicks, and goes, and it it's really amazing. The adrenaline is, really high, and so it was really fantastic doing that, and to do that with music that I liked, and musicians that I really dug, because the musicians in that band were all fantastic. It was great.
And the energy that band had, and you brought that energy to the band, and Lenny has so much energy, and I just remember seeing the band and the synergy and the energy you felt as someone just watching it in the audience. I felt the energy from the band. Like it took me into a certain energy.
Good. Yeah, that's good.
Like
that's good.
That's when a band is really on fire, when you're just drawn into it. The power that only live music can have, like
exactly.
That. And you guys had that as a band. So was the band materially kind of together the same band for that period? Like you guys just could build and gel, you know, as the whole group? Because Lenny, you know, would have different musicians sometimes and different configurations
Not that
of
much.
bands.
We didn't
That
change.
band was intact?
We didn't change that much, which was a great thing because, like you said, we could grow, and I love that. I love being in a situation, you know, where you're able to grow with a group of musicians and get from point A to point B all the way to point Z and back and start all over and then grow to another level again.
Yeah.
You know, keep just growing. And so, you know, once we got when I first joined, the band was pretty much, you know, we had a keyboard player who joined at the same time I joined, George Lax. Craig Ross was already in the band, guitar player. There was a bass player, Tony Bright, who stayed for kind of the first year that I was there, or most of the first year, and then after that, he left, and we got Jack Daly, who ended up being the bass player for the bulk of the time that I was there. The saxophone player changed to Harold Todd probably in the second year of me being there. Trumpet player was consistent, Michael Hunter. So, you know, we had this core band that was really, really tight. And some of them had been in the band before, you know, so they were very familiar with Lenny, obviously. But yeah, the band was super tight. You couldn't put a feather in between the beats. I mean, it was so tight. We logged in a lot of hours of playing, which was really great. We rehearsed a lot. We played a lot. We toured all the time, and we liked each other. So it was very cool. You know, it was like a very familial situation.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it makes such a difference. And it's interesting because the heroes that you shared earlier, the Miles, you know, groups that he had, and Art Blakey's groups, and Coltrane, and there, so much of the legacy of those artists are these windows of time where they were all together, and you could hear them grow on the records. You'd listen to the fourth record of a certain group, and then you'd listen to the first one, and you could actually hear all the maturation that's occurred because they had been playing in the studio and live as this unit. And it's interesting to hear that you experienced that to a great extent in Lenny's group. You know, like it's a similar kind of thing where you really hear the band. You know, I don't want to say improve because they're great all the time, but evolve.
You evolve.
Yeah.
You evolve because you do. You come to different not only levels of playing, but different ways of playing things, you know. And in that band, things were set in a lot of ways because, you know, he wanted to hear the music the way that he presented it on his records, which was fine. But live, you know, we would add different things, add stuff, you know, and so that was really, really cool to have that happen.
How many years did you play with Lenny?
Altogether, 17 years.
Oh
Yeah.
my God. So that time is flying. So
And most of that was with the core band, at least the core rhythm section. Most of that was with the core band. And when I went back in 2014 and 15, it was a different bass player. Gail was playing bass, and but still Craig and George, you know, Harold was a different trumpet player, you know. So, you know, but most of the core band was still there.
So you and Carlos have been married since 2010.
Yes.
You started playing together in the group in 2016. And here we are today as this interview occurs. It's 8 years in. And what can you share from that experience? What would be some of the biggest things that you've learned in doing it and playing that material and playing with your husband and an iconic musician and just that whole experience? How would you share it with somebody, the last 8 years on stage?
Oh my goodness, it's been amazing. I mean, you know, firstly, just playing with my husband is great because we're both sharing what we love most and what we cherish most in the entire universe, which is playing music and being able to present and touch people's hearts. You know, so that's all incredible. We both love that. And, you know, the music is amazing because he's he's got such a history. I mean, he saw Jimi Hendrix play. He saw Miles's band play. He was in that whole thing, and not only just watching it, he was a part of it because he was doing his thing. So he's got those elements. You feel that. You feel the Hendrix in him. You feel that he saw Miles. You feel that he saw all these different things, all these different cats at play. He's got all of that. He's got an amazing Rolodex of music in his head. So the music is constructed, but it's also very free. And he loves rhythm. He loves people to explore. So playing with him is a fantastic experience because the music is constantly evolving from not only from tour to tour or from year to year, but I'm talking from night to night, and I'm talking from song to song. Wow. So it's amazing playing with him because he's got a great eye and ear, and he's got a great open-mindedness, about letting the music happen. So he's incredible. I love playing with him. He's one of my absolute favorite guitar players ever, and one of my favorite musicians. Aside from me, my husband, but and that that's just a cherry on top, I guess.
That's awesome. Well, I hope we can do a part 2 because I still have a lot of questions to ask you.
We have to because
we promise.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Oh,
You kidding?
thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Look forward to
so
that.
much.
You're awesome. Always love being in your presence, and part 2 is going to be fun. I look forward to that.
It really is because there's so much to unwrap, and you were just getting started on the the experience of playing with Carlos and his musical depth and Rolodex, as you said. So, Cindy Blackman Santana, thank you for being here today. Modern drummer, thank you for being part of our community. We love you. And we'll see you again soon. Stay tuned for part 2, and stay tuned for a rundown of Cindy's drum setup, which I can't wait for you guys to see. And I'm excited to see it as well, so I can't wait to share it. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you.